Well, the great thing about doing tours is I tend to have people like engineers and stonemasons come. And so I depend upon their expertise to tell me what I'm looking at. And they're all blown away. They don't know of any kind of technology we have that can do this kind of work.
Yeah.
So you're talking about an incredibly advanced civilization or the possibility of ancient aliens, maybe.
Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. We are spending the hour with Brien Foerster discussing the elongated skulls of Peru and many other ancient anomalies that are that he's been working on researching. So welcome back to the show, Brien. Thank you for sticking around. I did see a couple questions from our viewers, and one person is asking, is there any chance that a lineage of these people still exists anywhere?
It's highly unlikely, but one never knows. Actually, when my wife and I were in Egypt, I think 2 years ago, we were in a bus and we drove past this man who had an incredibly large elongated head.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it is possible. I mean, there are stories of isolated pockets of very interesting people living in remote locations, but we do know that the lineage of the Paracas basically, in some ways, died out 2,000 years ago, but then also planted the seed of at least one hereditary line of the Inca, because the Inca, some people know that the Inca spoke a language called Quechua, which is better known as Runasimi, but I've learned recently that that was actually the language of the common people of the highlands of Peru. The Inca actually had their own language, which the local people couldn't understand, and it was called Puquina, and fascinatingly enough, the Paracas supposedly also spoke Puquina, so that's also another clue that that language came from the coast of Peru, wound up to become the royal language of the Inca people. And early Spanish accounts show that many of the Inca themselves were red-haired or some even blonde-haired.
Wow, that's very interesting. It actually leads on to my next question, because another person was asking, do the red hair discoveries that you've made, do you know if there's any relation to the myths of the Hopi about red-haired giants?
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, there's more and more growing evidence that there were ancient people who lived, especially in what we call the United States now, and possibly parts of Mexico, that they were very tall people who were there when the native people first showed up, and there are many indigenous stories of warfare between these two types of people. So I always honor what native traditions say, and if they say there were ancient red-haired, very tall people who were very warlike, then I tend to believe that. And also the work of many researchers like L.A. Marzulli are starting to support this fact, that there were so-called giants that lived in North America, and that especially the Smithsonian did a very effective job in the late 19th century of collecting up any evidence of that and hiding it from the general public, because it doesn't correspond with the standard Darwinian model, nor with the standard Western history of North America.
Yeah.
What we're looking for now, and that's the great thing about the internet and modern technology, is if the tomb of one of these giants is found, then DNA samples can be taken and be tested.
And hopefully found before it's scuttled off to the back rooms of the Smithsonian.
Well, that's the great thing about modern technology is that you can send photographs and video instantaneously. So the problem in the past has been people would find these these relics or remains and go, oh, I better take it to a museum or I better contact the police, and then they disappear.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So moving on just a little bit, because I know that recently you had, maybe it wasn't that recently, but I just remember and recall that you were maybe perhaps did a tour of the Nazca Lines maybe in the last year or so. But I was just wondering if you could touch on the Nazca Lines and perhaps those people and how the heck did they create those things?
Yeah, I was actually there last week, and Nazca's Nazca's a 4-hour drive from where I'm sitting right now. So of course I wrote a book about the Nazca system because there are so many different theories, alien runways or ceremonial things or whatever. So I looked at all the theories, and no one of the theories makes complete sense. So what people have to understand is that it's quite well known that the Nazca system of geoglyphs and lines were created between 500 BC and 500 AD. They start from maybe 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now, this massive geoglyph called the Candelabro, which is 500 feet tall on the side of a mountain in the Paracas Bay. And then they go all the way from there to Nazca, which is about 150 miles away. The famous Nazca ones, which Eric von Daniken made famous, etc., like the spider and the hummingbird, were made on the Nazca Plain area by the Nazca people. But the first ones were made by the Paracas, interestingly enough. So the Candelabro was made by the Paracas probably as a navigational marker, being so huge and only being able to see from the ocean. But then over the course of time, you had the Paracas making them for about 500 years. The so-called astronaut was made by the Paracas. Also in between Paracas itself and Nazca is an area called Palpa, and there you find more than 1,000 geoglyphs. A lot of them are anthropomorphic, as well as spirals and other geometric designs. Lots of the so-called runways are located there. And then in the Nazca area, you have about 30 to 40 of the famous big geoglyphs. So the big geoglyphs of the Nazca were likely made as ceremonial structures. Some of the complex line system was probably done to track underground water systems because, as I said earlier, it basically doesn't rain in Nazca. So for a culture to flourish, they had to be able to track and access underground water. Others were for solstice and lunar alignments, like the solstices and the equinoxes. So it's a real mix of different reasoning behind why these things were made. It also depended upon the time period. So again, probably beginning, they were just playful and being ceremonial. Then over time, as the area became more and more desert, it was more of a desperate attempt to track water systems, and then possibly ceremonial designs made to plead to the gods or creators to bring back the rain or to bring rain to them. So that's why I wrote a book about the subject.
And I just find it so fascinating because of their size. And I mean, how many can you actually see from the ground? Aren't a majority of them you have to be up in the air, basically?
Yeah, you can actually, when you're driving on the highway, you can see some of the lines will appear and disappear because the highway will line up to something and then veer away from it. But there's a tower located as you enter the Nazca area that was built by Maria Reiche, who was the Peruvian-German archaeologists who studied the system for 50 years. And so as you climb up this tower, once you're about 30 feet up, you can look down and see what are called the tree of life and also the hands. But in general, to see them properly, you have to be in an airplane.
Yeah, I would think so. And so you're saying that it did start off with the Paracas people, which correspond to the elongated skull people, and then was taken over by the Nazca people I guess what you said, they conquered the Paracas people.
Yeah, that appears to be the evidence that because the area was starting to turn to desert, likely the result of a major El Nino, because of course the El Nino effect takes place off the coast of Paracas, basically, of Peru. And so I think because the Paracas were so successful at agriculture and the pre-Nazca people were not, they went from being subsistence people to being forced to invade the much richer Paracas area. And then in order to take control, sadly, what happens in history is one people wipe out the leaders of another.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. They took over the whole area and gradually started moving into the Nazca area to the southeast, and were quite successful there, and then started to do their geoglyphs and lines. But then they basically denuded the entire area by 600 AD, and that caused them to collapse as a civilization, and they had to leave from there and go into the highlands of Peru in search of water, and then became amalgamated into other cultures.
Yeah, wow. And speaking of, well, I guess moving into the mountains or into the woods or whatever, I can't, of course, Machu Picchu is coming to mind as we're talking about this. What were the people of Machu Picchu? Was that the Inca?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this would be later on, perhaps, after the Paracas Nazca people? Or parallel?
The construction of Machu Picchu?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, then it's generally believed that the Inca formulated as a civilization around Lake Titicaca in Peru and Bolivia, somewhere around 100 AD. And then over the course of 1,000 years, they developed their civilization. But then again, climate, this is the amazing thing, especially around Peru, is you have these bouts of climate change that happen, not man-made, but of course natural, because of El Niños going overboard. And so the area of Lake Titicaca, rainfall diminished for more than 40 years, and that caused the proto-Inca to leave, and I believe they went back to their ancestral homeland, which was Cusco. They found an abandoned megalithic city and decided to rebuild their civilization there. That was likely around 1100 AD. Then, of course, they expanded massively. At the time of the Spanish conquest, their civilization stretched from the middle of Argentina and Chile in the south all the way to southern Colombia. So that's at least 2,000 miles.
Yeah, it's quite a region.
It developed into a population of 15 million people, and then the Spanish conquest more or less destroyed them between 1532 and 1535.
Oh, geez, wow. And we've only got about 10 more minutes left, and I really want to touch on this because, again, of course, I see all the wonderful information that you're posting on your Facebook page and these wonderful images and drone footage, and I can't help but always go back to the idea of their technology. How were they able to build these megaliths? I've seen where you've shown how perhaps even the earlier stuff might have been more precise, and the later stuff may not have been. Like the stones don't look as clean cut, for lack of a better term. And these holes that are being dug through these massive stones. Somebody, I believe I saw a comment, it looked like a laser cut through it. What were the people that had this technology, and what are your thoughts of what tools they were using, perhaps, to do these wonderful cuts through the stone?
Well, the great thing about doing tours is I tend to have people like engineers and stonemasons come. And so I depend upon their expertise to tell me what I'm looking at. and they're all blown away. They don't know of any kind of technology we have that can do this kind of work.
Yeah.
So you're talking about an incredibly advanced civilization, or the possibility of ancient aliens, maybe, who came here. The megalithic pre-Inca work is profoundly sophisticated, as in you can't fit a human hair in the joints. And then on top of that, you see the Inca work, which is far cruder. The Inca were a Bronze Age civilization, so they did not have the capability of cutting hard stone. Standard academia, like Western academics, will insist that the Inca did this, but if you ask any indigenous wisdom keeper in the Cusco area, they'll say, of course there was an advanced civilization before the Inca. The Inca discovered sites such as Cusco, Machu Picchu, and others that appear to have been destroyed by an ancient cataclysm. And because they were so profoundly blown away by what they found, they labeled these as sacred sites built by the gods, and then they built their own places there. So about 5% of Machu Picchu is the original megalithic construction that could have been made 12,000 plus years ago. And then the Inca found it somewhere maybe around 1300 AD, and over the course of 200 and something years, because again it was so profound what they did find in the middle of nowhere, they decided that this was a sacred site and they would build a major complex there.
And actually, you had mentioned last time you were on the show, we were talking about the cataclysm. So perhaps it's fair to say that from what you see, there probably was a very advanced, technologically advanced civilization that could have been wiped out by some type of natural cataclysmic event, and these people just came along and found these structures and called them their own, kind of.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we find stuff in Peru and Bolivia and Egypt and Lebanon and Petra in Jordan, which is mind-boggling. We see clearly tool marks that are sophisticated technology. It's not local people with chisels doing this work. It's machinery of some kind. There's one chain. Most people know of Petra because of the Indiana Jones film, The Last Crusade, where they show what's called the treasury. The treasury comprises less than 1% of Petra. It goes on for 7 miles.
Oh, wow.
And there are chambers there which there's a lot of them carved into really hard sandstone. One chamber, whoever created it had to remove 300,000 cubic feet of stone to make it.
Oh my gosh.
That's not nomadic people with a handful of chisels. That's technology that would be very difficult to replicate today. I was in complete shock when I went to Petra because I knew the treasury would be interesting to look at, but it took us 9 hours to walk from one end to the other and back.
Oh, wow. Geez, that's big.
And also we see catastrophic damage in all of these locations. Not simply earthquake damage, but we also, at many of them, it appears that the surface of the stone has been melted as if it's been struck by incredibly high temperatures for like a flash period of time, almost like solar plasma or something striking the stone. So that's why I wrote my book Aftershock, is looking at these ancient sites, clearly showing that they were not made by the civilizations that are attributed to them, like the Inca or the dynastic Egyptians, but that these people found them in a state of disrepair and obviously built in that area because the gods had been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Brien, when it comes to this information, I mean, and for me, this is much easier to believe than much of the mainstream stories that were told. I mean, just a few years ago, we thought civilization was only 5,000 years old. As we progress and we evolve, more and more information keeps coming through, especially when it comes to prehistoric advanced civilization. Seems to be a common thread in most of this. What is your observation of modern science embracing any of this? Has there been a crack in the shell? I mean, are they even open to the concept?
Well, I think I would think that researchers or academics in their maybe 50s or 60s don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole because
Right.
their entire life story is based upon what they've written about. So I think they will quietly go away eventually. I think younger people are more open-minded because the more data that we're able to collect, the more evidence we have of the fact that there were very advanced technological civilizations in the very distant past, clearly before 5,000 years ago. And this brings legitimacy to the idea that Atlantis as a concept did exist, and that other advanced civilizations also existed and were devastated by at least one, if not a number, of different cataclysmic events that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, all you got to do is look at the new research that's coming out. Anybody who has any type of discernment can kind of tell that most of what we're being told is not the full historical picture. To me, it's just common sense. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I know you guys are going to be doing a tour pretty soon, and I was wondering if you could share with us. First of all, are there any spaces left that anybody could join you?
No, the tour that we're doing, starting actually the day after tomorrow, sold out 3 months ago,
Oh, okay.
which is great. And we're doing exploration of the ancient cultures of Mexico in January, but we've decided to turn off joining that as of today. We have one in March going to Egypt, which is our 6th annual Lost Ancient Technology Tour. I think there are about 5 to 10 spaces left on that one.
Wow.
Yeah, we're doing the Inti Raymi celebration of the sun, which is an Inca celebration in June, and we have spaces for that. And then our annual Elongated Skulls tour of Peru is in August, and all of that can be found on my website.
And that's hiddenincatours.com?
That's right.
Ah, I remembered. Very good. Very cool. And the one in Egypt, that's with the Kemetic School of Ancient Mysticism?
Yeah, that's right. It's all being organized by Patricia Awian with Yusuf Awian, and they are by far the best guides in Egypt because they of course cover standard dynastic Egyptian material, but most of the emphasis is on lost ancient high technology. And Patricia is an expert on ancient metaphysics. So we're mixing, or we're combining physics and metaphysics because they're two aspects of the whole. We can't simply look at scientific pursuit or esoteric. We have to look at all of it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I just love how over the last couple of years, the Ions and yourself are working together and doing these tours. I think it's great. They're like the Egyptian expert. You're like the America's expert. So it's so nice to see these minds coming together and working together. And of course Stephen Mailer, who's another wonderful contributor. And I just want to thank you for all the work that all of you are doing. I think it's so important. I believe it's a part of the awakening process, and I believe that it's a part of connecting to our infinite potential that has been suppressed for so long as we learn to understand what's really going on in our history. So thank you for that. And as far as your books, you have a new book out recently?
Yeah, I actually just wrote one about Petra because I was in shock when I went there. It's like it took us all day to look at it, and then the next morning we were told, "Oh, do you want to go see Little Petra?" So we drove for half an hour, and there was another huge complex carved into the mountainside. It's like, oh my God! And I'm working on a book about the Paracas right now, but it won't be out until we get the DNA results, which again, we're hoping to do the press conference in the middle of next month. And it's taken more than 3 years to get this far, but finally we'll get to reveal to the world who these ancient people were and how they probably don't fit in with standard Native American history.
Wonderful. Well, there we are. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, Brien, and thank you so much, Revolution Radio, for allowing us to provide this program to everybody. We will see you next week. I have Chris Jones coming on the show next week. If you all remember him, he wrote a fabulous book on consciousness and moving beyond the veil of the illusion. So we'll be back here next week. I love you, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.